All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we check out great theories, concepts, and discoveries that you are probably not familiar with, but if you were, they would be very helpful in terms of your spiritual, mental, and physical growth and, uh, you know, improvement. And this is another in our Bible Decode series, number 402. This is stuff that your priest or pastor, rabbi or minister does not want you to know and will not tell you if they even know themselves and will consider you kind of a troublemaker for even asking. Um, and in our Bible Decode series, we have been looking into various aspects of the Roman origins hypothesis that is emerging. There are probably a dozen authors out there right now who, in one way or another, believe that the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars, are the true authors of the New Testament, or at least the Gospels, depending on the author. And according to the theory, the Romans wrote the New Testament as a psychological operation against the Jews. The Jews had been a big headache for the Romans for over 100 years, ever since the Romans occupied Judea in 63 BC. It would have been one constant tension, uh, punctuated by outbreaks and uprisings and terrorist attacks and revolts and insurrections, and culminating in a war in 66 AD when um, some self proclaimed Jewish messiahs led a revolt in Judea, in Jerusalem, to kick out the puppet ruler of the Romans, who was one of the Herod family, Herod Agrippa II. And Herod uh, scuttled back to Rome, leaving the Jews in control of their own land there for a fleeting moment until Emperor Nero got the news and sent in the army, led by General Vespasian. And it literally took the Romans 7 years to put down the revolt. And so after that whole thing ended, which included 3 years plus of Vespasian, and then eventually Vespasian, after Nero was assassinated, and three other Roman emperors were assassinated in this Roman civil war, which was also going on. Um, General Vespasian got the call to become the new emperor. So he appointed his son Titus to be the new general there in Judea. And it took the two of them 7 years to put down this revolt, during which time both of them were wounded. And then eventually both of them, came back to Caesar's palace in Rome and kind of decided that we're not going to let this happen again. And so they concocted this, uh, and this had already been in the works behind the scenes, but they really decided to launch the psychological operation by writing a fictional story about a Jewish Messiah who, instead of being a military commander, was a prince of peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and believed in turning the other cheek and walking the extra mile. In other words, being utterly deferential to the Romans, while at the same time being highly critical of the Jews when he overturns the tables of the money changers, and when he yells and screams at the uh, vendors selling small animals at the temple for the sacrifice. And when he tells his disciples that they must abandon their families to follow him. These are all blows against the Jewish traditions and rituals. And then they concocted a character named Paul, eventually, who is even more deferential to the Romans and even more critical of the Jews. And you can see this whole plot unfold if you get yourself a copy of the work of Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian known as Flavius Josephus, because he was an adopted member of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars, which included Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. And Josephus surrendered to Vespasian as a Jewish military commander in this war, and somehow got himself a pardon because he predicted that Vespasian would become the new emperor. He kind of pandered to Vespasian, according to the autobiography, which I find to be very suspect. But however it happened, however the story goes, a character named Josephus was a resident of a townhouse at Caesar's palace and was a member of a court historian for the Flavians and a bona fide member of their family. And he wrote a 7-volume history of this war called War of the Jews. And when you peruse War of the Jews, you get deja vu, because so much of it is reminiscent of what you read in the Gospels. And then when you sit down and compare, go blow by blow in there, you see that the military campaign of Titus in Judea is identical with the ministry of Jesus in Judea. And you see that much of the autobiographical story of Josephus in Judea is identical with Jesus's biography in Judea. And you will also see that just in the book of Luke, there are hundreds and hundreds of parallels between the two books. They are meant to be read together, and they are kind of bouncing off each other, like having a conversation with each other, meaning that they were written at the same time by the same people for the same reason. And then to go even further, as Michael Menescott documents in his Christianity's Origin as a Flavian Secrecy Cult, if you take all the hundreds of parallels in the book of Luke and you graph them on a chart, they form 5 near perfect letters in Latin, the language of the Roman Caesars, APTVS. TVS, TV would be Titus Vespasian, I would assume. Basically, the Romans signed their names to the book of Luke. The book of Luke has an autographed copy written by the true authors, the Romans. And So that is extensive evidence for the uh, Roman authorship of the New Testament, and that can be compared with the zero evidence for the existence of Jesus outside of the New Testament, because there isn't any corroborating witnesses to the existence of Jesus are members of the Roman royal court, and there is no other evidence. I challenge you to find me some uh, and send it on over. I'd be happy to look at it. I've also now taken in uh, some of the works that Christians have given me to try to convert me to Christianity, and they have all stated their case for the Romans. You know, one book was this book called The Case for Christ, and the author, Lee Strabel, he makes a case for Christ, but it makes an actually a better case for Caesar, um, because in many places he gets to a place where he says, "There's no other way that it that this could have occurred unless God was the person involved." And of course, at that point, you could say, or Caesar. It could be Caesar and not God who did it. And William of Ockham would always um, go with the natural explanation, albeit conspiratorial, over the supernatural explanation. And the same is true of, I've only finished half the book so far, but Missler's Cosmic Codes, he gets into the same thing. And he gets into there is no other way than the Bible must have been written by God, or it could have been written by the Romans. That could definitely account for all of the coincidences in there, all the numerical codes that underlie it. The Romans were masters of this kind of thing. Anyway, what we're doing today, again, is we are looking at a book that documents some of this, because when the Romans were writing the New Testament, they had to make it look like a real religion. So they put in a lot of stuff that is religious, stuff that you would consider to be righteous and pious and uplifting, to go along with their, mockery, derision, ridicule, and humiliation that they were trying to put the Jews through as well. Um, and so they drew upon sources, and this is why I think that Josephus was probably really more like a think tank of Roman intellectuals that all resided at the court there for the Caesars, because it's wide ranging. They put in stuff from Egypt, stuff from Persia, stuff from Greece, from Rome, from Judea, from India, from China, from Japan, uh, possibly even from Mexico, although that's kind of a stretch. Norse mythology, alchemy, numerology, astrology, magic, all of it is in there. The Romans literally put in everything they could think of into the New Testament. None of it in the New Testament, none of the stuff in there, the religious stuff, is original. All of it is borrowed from earlier sources. And that's documented here by uh, Kersey Graves in his 1876 book called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity. And he looks at many of these different cases of, and through many different episodes that occur during the Gospels, he shows, the prior influences that these different themes have. And right now, I think we're on chapter 31, and he's kind of discussing this group that is called the Essenes, a very pious, strict sect uh, of Jews who I don't believe ever existed, because just like Jesus, the only corroborating evidence for the Essenes were Roman higher ups, people uh, adjacent to the Roman court, including Josephus and Pliny the Younger and um, and Philo Judaeus, who was a little bit earlier period, but his family was in tight with the Flavians, and they are the only three people that have ever talked about the Essenes. And so I strongly doubt that they even existed. But some scholars believe that Jesus was himself an Essene, and that the Dead Sea Scrolls are kind of an unveiling of the Essenes. Um, but he, Kersey Graves, here in this book has been kind of going over the um, kind of what the Essenes believed, and showing that the same kind of belief system is reflected in the Gospels. So we'll start right here when he's talking about Josephus. Josephus, born 37 AD. And again, here, Josephus was not even born at the time of Jesus' so called crucifixion. And so he is absolutely not an eyewitness, as some Christians might believe, to the events. Even his corroborating evidence is at least 4, if not 6 decades after the events in question. And then, even so, he is writing as part of a psychological operation. So he's not to be trusted one bit. And this is really going to overturn a lot of history, because Josephus is a very important historian that all kinds of ancient historians rely upon for his accounts. His 7-volume work, War of the Jews, and his 20-volume work, Jewish Antiquities, which is really kind of his recounting of the entire Old Testament of the Bible, including some material that's not in the Old Testament, like all the periods, like the 400 years between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. There's a big gap there. Josephus kind of covers that gap. And so, but when you consider that Josephus is involved in a psychological operation, um, that throws a lot of cold water onto his accounts. And his accounts are pretty fanciful anyway, and I think we're being quite credulous to be believing him in the first place. But a lot of it is desperation, because in some cases, there are no other sources. Okay, so Josephus, born 37 AD, and who was also at one time a member of the Essenian Brotherhood, according to his own account, furnishes another fragmentary account of the Essenes in his Jewish Wars, or War of the Jews, of which the following is the substance. Quote, "They love each other more than others. They despise riches and have all things in common, so that there is neither abjectness of poverty nor distinction of riches among them. They change neither garments nor shoes till they are worn out or become unfit for use. They neither buy nor sell among themselves. Their piety is extraordinary. They never speak about worldly matters before sunrise. They are girt about with a linen apron and have a baptism of cold water. They eat but one kind of food at a time and commence with a prayer, and the priest must say grace before anyone eats. They also return thanks after eating and then put off their white garments. Strangers were made welcome at their tables without money and without price. They give food to the hungry and the needy and show mercy to all. They curb their passions, restrain their anger, and claim to be ministers of peace, an oath they regard as worse than perjury. They excommunicate offenders. Uh, they condemn finery in dress, though condemning in most solemn terms oaths. Members were admitted to the secret brotherhood by an oath. They endured pain with heroic fortitude and regarded an honorable death as better than long life. They read and study, or they read and study their holy scriptures from youth, often prophecy, and it was very seldom they failed in their predictions. And that's the end of the quote from Josephus or Josephus. And then Dr. Ginsburg's testimony, abridged, is as follows. And so this person is a modern person or a more modern person, um, and so his account lacks any type of eyewitness, you know, for primary source documentation. This is probably he's getting this from having read the other sources, so it doesn't seem to be valuable to put it in here, but he's got it here. So the Essenes had a high appreciation of the inspired law of God. The highest aim of their lives was to become fit temples of the Holy Ghost, also to perform miraculous cures and to be spiritually qualified for forerunners of the Messiah. They taught the duty of mortifying the flesh and the lusts thereof, and um, to be, and to become meek and lowly in spirit. They answered by yea, yea, and nay, nay, um, surreptitiously avoiding oaths. They avoided impure contact with the heathen and the world's peoples and lived retired from the world. Being in numbers about 4,000, they strove to be like angels of heaven. They were not rich and poor. There were no rich and poor or masters and servants amongst them. They lived peaceably with all men. A mysterious silence was observed while eating. A solemn oath was required on becoming a member of the secret order, which required three things. One, love to God. Two, merciful justice to all men, and to avoid the wicked and help the righteous. Three, purity of character, which implied love of truth, hatred of falsehood, and strict observance of the mysteries of godliness. To outsiders, that is, heathen and publicans, they endured suffering for righteousness' sake with rejoicings and even sought it, regarding the body as a prison for the soul. They desired the time to come to escape from it. They recognized 8 different stages of spiritual growth and perfection. 1, bodily purity. 2, celibacy. 3, spiritual purity. 4, the suppression of anger and malice and the cultivation of a meek, lowly spirit. 5, the attainment of true holiness. 6, becoming fit temples for the Holy Ghost. 7, the ability to perform miraculous cures and raise the dead. and 8 becoming forerunners of the Messiah. And finally, they took a solemn vow to exercise piety toward God and justice toward all men, to hate the wicked, to assist the good, to keep clear of theft and unrighteous gains, to conceal none of their mysteries of godliness from each other, or disclose them to others. Just have to point out here that um, this is really very close to what the Romans would have wanted you to be. This is, to me, some evidence that the Romans are the true um, authors of the Essenes, as well as being the true authors of the New Testament. The Romans wanted you to be a good citizen. They wanted you to be honest, hardworking, law abiding, meek, and, you know, and otherwise low maintenance. What they didn't want you to be is like a Jew who was constantly fighting back, constantly willing to die for their rituals and traditions, and constantly fighting for those things, uh, willing to resort to violence in order to maintain what they had. That's what they didn't want you to be. They wanted you to be more like the Essenes or more like Jesus. So that is, some indication that the Romans are the true um, creators of the Essenes. Going further with Ginsburg's commentary here, great is the mystery of godliness. They were to walk humbly with God, shun bad society, forgive their enemies, sacrifice their passions, and crucify the lusts of the flesh. They disregarded bodily suffering and even gloried in martyrdom, preaching and singing to God amid their sufferings, but in their domestic habits they were extremely filthy. They wore their clothes till they became ragged, filthy, and offensive, never changing them till they were worn out. Their food consisted of bread and water, and wild roots and fruits of the palm tree. They enjoined the duty not only of forgiving enemies, but of seeking to benefit them, and of even blessing the destroyer who took life and property. Sounds like it would have been dialed up perfectly by the Romans. Such was the religion, such the moral system, such the devout piety. That was the end of the quote. Okay, so now we're talking. Graves is now speaking here. Such was the religion, such the moral system, such the devout piety, and such the practical lives of the Essenian Jews, a religious sect which flourished in Alexandria and Judea several hundred years before the birth of Christ, and went out of history the hour Christianity came in. Now, as the foregoing exposition shows that Essenism and Christianity are most strikingly alike in all their essential features, that the former system contains nearly every important doctrine and precept of the Christian religion, the question occurs here as one of momentous import. How is this striking resemblance, this identity of character of the two religions, to be accounted for? Does it not go far toward proving that Christianity is an outgrowth, a legitimate offspring of Judean Essenism? Indeed, are we not absolutely driven to such a conclusion? Let us briefly recite some of the important facts brought to light by the investigation of the character and history of these two religions, and see if these facts do not bring them together and weld them as one system. God, he's been going over this over and over and over again. What he can't see is that they're both Roman. They both were created by the Romans. That's what they have in common. Both are one. Both are alike, and Essenism is much older. Two, both religions are an outgrowth of Judaism. 3, both were known and taught in Judea and in Alexandria. 4, Josephus living in Judea and Philo in Alexandria. Neither of them speaks of Christianity or refers to any such religion by that name, and yet both describe a religion inculcating the same doctrines and moral precepts, which they call Essenism. Josephus most certainly does speak of Christianity in passing in a couple of different passages in his works. But regardless, is not this very nearly conclusive proof that Essenism was only another name for Christianity, that it had not yet changed its name to Christianity? Um, uh, I'm really tiring of this person's analysis here, just because it just keeps going on and on and on. And he's got a lot of good stuff in this book, but regardless, we're gonna stop right there before I get you know um, more tired out than I already am. Um, but I guess tomorrow we're gonna try to see if we can get through this chapter. That's one of the big problems of reading these 19th century books, is that these people just go on and on and on, and they're they write sentences that last for a whole page, and they write paragraphs that last for 7 pages. So you're trying to find a breaking point, and that just doesn't happen. So we just broke it off right there. We'll get back to this work tomorrow. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. Um, and come back tomorrow for another Bible Decode, number 403. And we will hopefully get through this incredibly tedious section on the Essenes and its comparisons with Christianity. Simple comparison is that they were both created by the Romans. But this author doesn't know that. And so we have to kind of humor him going through this. Okay. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.